Today's episode is brought to you by HP Poly, where premium audio and video meet hybrid work. From headsets to video bars, HP Poly keeps your team connected, clear, and collaborative. Learn more at cdw.ca/poly. Hello and welcome to the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. I'm your host, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada. In this episode, we're going to discuss the CDW Canada Cybersecurity Study. I've got a couple of my favorite CDW coworkers here, Ivo and Ben, and we're going to learn all about the new findings and kind of how things have changed in the landscape of cybersecurity. Ivo, if you could go ahead and introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role at CDW. I think you've been on before, so it's a bit of a recap.
Happy to be here again, KJ. I'm Ivo Wiens. I'm the Field CTO for Cybersecurity at CDW Canada. I have over 20 years worth of cybersecurity experience. Started on the network security side of the house, moved over to the pen testing side of the house, ran a SOC for a number of years, and now what I do in my current role is I run our security architecture team, and I also help set the strategy for what we do from a cybersecurity perspective here at CDW when it comes to helping clients solve problems. So very much similar to your role, KJ, but more specific to the cybersecurity space. So, and I'm really excited to talk about the study today. I think it will resonate really well with Canadian organizations.
And a big milestone with the study this year too, right?
Yeah, it's been over 10 years now that we've been doing the study. And it's fantastic to work with a company like IDC that goes out to the market and basically takes our crazy ideas and crazy questions and goes out to the market and actually surveys it. And, it's really and having it be a Canadian study and having it focus specifically on Canadian organizations couldn't be more timely, right? Couldn't be more timely in terms of getting the perspective of Canadian organizations as we're going through these complicated times when it comes to data, and not just data sovereignty, but everything sovereignty, right?
Yeah, everything changing quickly. And Ben Boydiku, welcome to the podcast. And maybe introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your role at CDW, and help the listeners kind of get to know you.
Thanks, KJ. My name is Ben Boydiku. I usually say it's so easy for me to introduce myself after Ivo. In this case, he's making it quite difficult because of his tenure. Just like Ivo, I've been in the industry for about 20 to 25 years. About 17, 18 years ago, I started a consulting firm that was around technology risk management, which eventually became the risk advisory team here at CDW. I managed that team for about 17 years, switched roles last year. I'm now focused on the strategic vision of the services we have within cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I know I benefit from your guys' knowledge, and I know our customers in one way get to benefit from things like the cybersecurity study because it's kind of a distillation of a lot of that. But it's always good to kind of pull you guys into the conversations I have because I always learn quite a bit. So let's just kind of get into it. So 10 years of cybersecurity studies, there's been a lot of change. Things are evolving. You keep thinking they're going to slow down, but they don't. They just keep accelerating. What are some of the key things, Ivo, that you really saw in 2024? Some of the through lines or some of the trends that helped us get to 2025, or maybe played a big part in 2024 as a year.
Yeah, I mean, and connecting back to some of the podcast episodes that you've already done here, KJ, I think one of the key areas is that the attack surface, because the IT surface is changing. Obviously, the attack surface is changing along with it, right? We're seeing it continue to evolve. Company assets, user endpoints. Obviously, there was a big spike during COVID, and those assets didn't go anywhere. They're still out there. We saw a slight reduction in client computing for large enterprises, but we still continue to see a rise in servers and IoT devices within organizations. When we talk about, and we're going to dig obviously into AI. You can't talk about anything without digging into AI a little bit. what we're seeing is also a growth of assets that support AI, internal AI. Be it proof of concepts or even SaaS, which does a continuous proliferation in SaaS side of the house. But in terms of a through line, and one of the key areas we're seeing is that cyber attack success rate continues to increase. So even though the overall count of cyber attacks and the rate of infections are on the decline, and that's a pattern we saw again last year, we also see the success rate of these attacks, even resulting from the attacks. Events resulting from the attacks are on the rise. So we're seeing a lot happen there, and a lot more. The attacker profile has really changed from the person in the basement, the single attacker, to more organized crime. And organized crime, as you can imagine, is looking for the right ROI when it comes to what they need to do. So we're seeing that growth from a statistics perspective, and we're also seeing downtime resulting from cyber incidents continue to be a big impact for especially small and medium business in Canada, and that's where obviously we see the majority of the pain. An interesting thought and an interesting editorializing of the study when I read through it is that there's a real cybersecurity gap between those the haves and have-nots in Canada. Large organizations and more mature, and we actually did some assessment of maturity within Canada. The bigger companies who spend the most money in cybersecurity are doing better at it. Thinking through that, it really creates a challenge for us as an industry to figure out how are we going to bring cybersecurity to the small and medium business in Canada.
But I'll double click on that, Ivo, because when we look at the disparity between organizations, the majority of the organizations who had adequate or less than adequate was around 60% of the respondents. So there's still a significant amount of organizations that fall into there. And the way that we looked at it is, this is the first time we've done this survey where we've asked respondents to self-attest what they believe their security maturity is. So this year we broke it into 4 levels. Typically, the way we've done it in the industry is 5, but we found more respondents gathered into the 4 levels. So we have reactive defense, foundational protection, operational resilience, as well as strategic security. So think of strategic security as fully automated. Everything is done from an autonomous platform. They have their security down packed. Whereas in the reactive defense, they get breached, they get attacked. That's when they now react and start thinking of putting things into place.
Yeah, and I'm kind of wondering when you say we moved from being in the basement to being more of an organized crime. I wonder if there's back to office policies that that hackers are dealing with too.
You'd be surprised. I heard some of the organizations even have HR departments.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of what I hear listening to you guys and kind of following some of the information is just the maturity of those organizations is improving. So to kind of look at 2024 and put a cap on it as a year, historically there's been certain events that kind of we recall. I think we know like the SolarWinds event, and that sort of became a big thing during the year. Are there any, maybe not necessarily specific industry events, but are there any sort of, key terms or anything that we can call out that sort of maybe separated 2024 from previous years?
I would say, I would say specific. Yeah, no, I'll jump in and I'll give Ben some space there too. But specifically, cloud security continues to be a lagging frontier when it comes to protecting organizations. Cloud security testing is way behind. So we're seeing, 45, almost 46%. Of organizations don't do cloud security testing at all. That's still kind of separate. Be it, there is testing out there that can look at misconfiguration. when we're talking about SaaS. There's also generally penetration testing you can do for non-SaaS applications like IaaS and PaaS as well. So there is testing that can happen. There's a lot of organizations who still kind of 30% organizations still apply the same testing methods that they did for on-prem. They use them for cloud systems, even though they're completely different. They just kind of extend it, say, you know what we have on-prem is the same as cloud, and it's not true. There are differences, and there are different ways of approaching cloud testing as well. And then there's still 20% of organizations that just rely on the cloud provider, right? Just say, hey, you know what, it's good. What they have is probably good enough for me, which is not true, right? There's a fallacy within cloud that the hyperscalers themselves will say this, that you need to not only turn on the features that we're selling, but you do need to look to third-party controls in order to make things as secure as possible. So there's a reason why they partner with these other vendors as well. So we're seeing on the cloud testing practice, we're seeing that continue to grow. And then there's a lack of understanding of the risk when it comes to cloud as well. When we talk about cloud, how much data people are uploading there, and understanding the risk of how what they're using, and understanding that shared responsibility model when it comes to risk is highly important as well.
I would
and just to kind of like tap in on that too. I mean, we even see that from an AI perspective. We find a high percentage of users that are using publicly available tools. And you're right, it comes back to education, which was interesting. We had David Shipley from Boucheron on a few episodes ago in the podcast, and the whole interaction between the technology advancements and the tooling advancements, but the need to educate your people is really interesting. And then Ben, to turn it over to you, when you think of 2024 and you think of some of the maturity issues, like what are some of the other challenges that you're seeing from your perspective?
I would say, sticking with the security testing or the penetration testing space, on the other side of things, we've seen that the organizations that identify themselves as strategic security, they do continuous security testing quite frequently. 70% of those respondents said that they have a continuous security testing program in place. And that's been a recommendation for quite some time now. So it's good to see that organizations that believe that they're at the highest point of security maturity, they are doing that.
And then kind of sticking with that Ben, when you think about that security testing and that maturity, are there parts of maybe technology or process? Is there anything that sort of disappointed you about the stats that you're seeing from 2024? And is it a lack of understanding, or is it a lack of tooling? Is it just not having the right processes?
I'd answer that in two parts. The first part is what I was happy to see reinforcement with is the organizations that took security testing seriously and did it continuously, or had rigor and cadence to it. They had far better security outcomes. They had less breaches overall. On the other side, pretty much what Eva was dialing into, the cloud security testing, that is a space where there could be a lot more improvement. Considering the majority of new businesses, they're more cloud reliant, cloud heavy. So they're using these tools and not necessarily ensuring that they are secure. And secure in this case is really around the configurations, as Ivo mentioned.
And that doesn't even step into the area which is going to be the next laggard, which is AI testing, right? AI penetration testing is going to be the next area where we're going to have to really, true prompt testing and getting into and understanding not only understanding, like you talk about shadow AI, right? Like shadow AI is a big part of the conversation. Where is this data going? And the cloud's been around for a while, and we're still having those issues. Sadly, I think that's going to even expand even further when we talk about AI. Whether it's in-house LLMs or RAGs, or even if third-party that's being hosted through a SaaS model. After all, we're going to have to understand what kind of data that's been communicated, and what language the data is being communicated, how it's being communicated, what kind of files are we allowing to upload up there. you know, the number of respondents in the study that reported that the cloud environments were affected has gone up from 43% in 2022 to 60% this year.
Oh,
So
wow.
that number continues to grow, right? So we're seeing a steady increase from respondents in the environments that were affected, that where the cloud environment was affected. And I don't know, and maybe you have the stat, KJ, from our cloud study, but I don't know if is cloud growing at that rate still, or is cloud attacks being the new target, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When we look at the cloud report and the data that we're getting from that, we're actually not seeing this double digit growth in the public cloud
Mm-hmm.
like we were for the last 5 or 6 years, and really over the last 18 months. It's really slowed down to new projects being developed in the cloud, and sort of a steadying off of the total number of workloads that
Right.
organizations have in the public cloud. So I think you're right. I think maybe it's a shift of focus to trying to find ways to compromise those solutions. I also am curious, when you look at the state of that, is there sort of a culprit you can call out? Because we like to talk about people, we like to talk about process, we like to talk about technology,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the things I think that's been consistent over the last few security studies has really been that the public cloud is an enabler of security in the sense that it's built with a lot of zero trust methodologies, sort of natively in the platform. So if it's not necessarily the technology, are you thinking you're finding more of a process issue, or is it a people and training issue? Like, where are you seeing the challenges there?
I think I always like to point at process because I think that it's too easy, especially in cybersecurity, to say that the humans are
Mm.
the problem. And we're in our profession, we've been known to point at people and judge them for what they do in
Yeah.
cybersecurity. I'm going to say I think the technology is there, right? When it comes to protecting cloud assets, the technology is there. I think the process, and I think a little bit, and I'd love to hear Ben's take on this too. I think understanding the value of the data is a challenge, and we have another finding around Gen AI and Gen AI adoption. I think understanding and classifying the data has been a
Hmm.
challenge and continues to be a challenge. Hopefully, it may be a challenge that can be fixed with what we're bringing in from the large language models and understanding that better. We've seen an uptake in technologies. That help with data governance, data compliance,
Hmm.
and data classification. We've seen a huge uptick on those technologies in the last, I'm going to say, year or so, because they're realizing that the lack of understanding of the data is a challenge. So to wind back to your question in the beginning, I think it's a great challenge, but also a great opportunity that we're seeing for us as security practitioners to support the business by saying you don't have to hesitate to go to to continue on the cloud or to move into an AI model, whatever
Hmm.
AI model you're looking to move into. Let's figure out that this challenge that's always been there: data loss prevention, data classification, and those areas. I think it's a process problem. I think it's a little bit of a time to fix a problem that's been there for a long time from a technical debt perspective or data classification debt, however you want to see that.
But if you look at it, and I really love what you said. When I'm out there and I'm speaking to whether it's CISOs or CIOs, I do bring up the point that we've had these technologies for quite some years,
Hmm.
especially when there was a push for DLP, data loss protection. We didn't necessarily ramp up en masse that it would have been expected. However, with Gen AI and how easy it is to misconfigure or get access to data that shouldn't be accessed, etc., that fear has prompted a lot of organizations to finally ramp up on the data governance piece, data classification piece, and all the processes and tools that come along with it.
I found it interesting. One of the things you said earlier, Ben, that I think relates to this is where organizations are successful. And you talked about larger organizations that maybe have more mature processes have been more successful. And I kind of wonder, is it that they have these processes, but they've developed them in kind of a flexible manner, so that adding something like public cloud services doesn't necessarily cause them as much grief. Whereas if you have more ad hoc processes, or you have less defined structure, smaller and medium businesses are struggling a bit more. Like, how do you look at the maturity of the organization and align that to where some organizations are succeeding, some organizations are not? Are there any sort of learnings that can be taken out of that?
So one of my other favorite things to say, and again, our model is prepare, defend, respond, and it sounds so linear, and it really isn't. It's cyclical. Whatever way you get on the treadmill, just get on the treadmill. We could backfill and start working on technique and doing things correctly over time. So with small organizations, they don't start off writing security policies, procedures, guidelines. They don't have volumes and volumes of documentation. It's fine. Unless they need it for regulation, you're going to do what you need to do first. So typically that's protecting the endpoint, and then network, etc. So you slowly build these pieces. So I would recommend making sure that you at least cover the bare, like the foundational security elements. So basic foundational. If you look at the CIS top 18, they have a foundational level of security. Address that first. The policies are important. That's what's helping the more mature organizations adopt things like cloud and AI faster, because they know what it takes to protect their information, and they know the rigor that they have in terms of control of that information.
Yeah,
So,
that was
okay.
it ties in really well to another finding of the study, which is that organizations are we're seeing zero trust work in theory and and have a shortfall in practice, right? Like Canadian organizations are finding it hard to translate strategy and assessments into actual actionable progress. I remember when I was a consultant, one of the things we talked about was always like how much shelfware we were creating, right? Reports that just sit on the, you would visit a client and see a report printed out and in a binder up there, but nothing actually hitting the ground from an actionable perspective. And that's what we're seeing that in the market, and the survey actually lined up perfectly with what we're seeing. Is clients are coming to us and saying, I like zero trust. I'm tired of hearing about zero trust. I like zero trust as a philosophy, but how do I actually tie in technical controls to what we're doing, right? Really tying in, making sure that the rubber meets the road when it comes to data. One of the areas we didn't touch on, and I wanted to make sure that when we're talking about processes, is identity. Identity is going to be so key for what we're doing in the future when it comes to AI and how we implement zero trust, specifically once we get to agentic AI, right? I got news for you. The AI agent is an identity. It needs to have an identity. You're gonna have to copy an identity, maybe. Right? The person who's doing the AI who's gonna do KJ's job needs to be have the same access, or maybe a little less than KJ has right now. So that's gonna be the tough conversation we're gonna have when we get to these levels. We want to solve the data classification model, but we also want to make sure that we're not going to move into give AI any more access into your organization until we understand the roles and responsibilities, the roles within your organization. So making that jump, zero trust and identity, I think are really close together. You need to make sure you know who people say they are. And I think that's going to be an interesting connection when we get there, right?
Yeah,
So
and
I think
and I think
that's a
and I think something that's interesting there is I think that due to a lot of the hype cycle of trying to get a lot of interest in what we think is going to be critical for how we approach security, how we approach our infrastructure, how we approach platforms. There's all this effort that goes into making AI maybe bigger than what it is, and making zero trust maybe bigger than what it is. And I think one of the challenges you run into is just overall fatigue. As you point out, like you if you're hyped up about zero trust and you've been evangelizing zero trust, and then all of a sudden you're talking to customers, they're like, yeah, but holy cow, I'm so tired of hearing about it without seeing the
Right.
delivery of
Yeah.
the value. That becomes a big problem because there's a lot of good qualities to having your identity mapped out, having your resources and then that mapped out, and looking at role-based access controls, and there's all sorts of great value there. But if organizations are tired of hearing about it, that can be a big hurdle to try and get through. So like Ben, when you're talking to organizations and you're trying to maybe reframe zero trust or reframe the need to have that focus on identity, that focus on what are your assets, how do you minimize that? How are you having that conversation and keeping that fresh and making it more actionable than just sort of talking frameworks and possibilities?
It's really about the outcomes. I spent a lot of time on and not necessarily delivering, but managing and leading the offensive security side of things. So the penetration testers, when organizations see the actual outcomes of an engagement, they tend to start getting worried, because we can take you from zero access to your organization to a full compromise. Sometimes it's harder, sometimes it's not, but showing them tangible outcomes, I believe, is one first step in at least reducing the fatigue.
Yeah, and so Evo, when you look at some of the outcomes that organizations are focusing on, and within the report, obviously you get a lot of data about kind of what is the sentiment, and how are customers approaching things. What are some of the outcomes maybe that are newer out of this report than maybe we didn't see in previous reports?
That's a great question, KJ. When it comes to cybersecurity, obviously mean time to detect, mean time to respond is still big part of the conversation. So understanding how quickly we should be responding to attacks. Obviously, measuring downtime. I touched on downtime a little bit already, but we're seeing a real shift to on the detection side, right? We're seeing organizations, adopt advanced threat detection technologies at a breakneck speed, actually, compared to what it used to be, right? I think the antivirus revolution to the user behavior analysis side, and then the behavior within the endpoint. So the adoption of EDR and XDR and NDR technologies together are actually making a big move. And we're seeing, because of that, I think we're finally winning a little bit of that arms race that we have against attackers. We're seeing a little more advanced there, which is really exciting. And detection response is getting better, because we're doing everything local on our machines, and we have really strong detection systems within our machines. So we're seeing NTD, time to detect and time to respond, jump up.
That's what I was going to say. So we used a couple of acronyms. We used
Oh,
MDR, XDR, EDR. If you could just
I
break
know.
that down really quick.
Going to town with the acronym. So MDR is basically the operationalization and having a team do the work when it comes to detection and response. So that's a managed detection response service, basically, that you're buying. But XDR is extendable, so it's the combination of both endpoint and network and other areas. You can also bring your SIM into an XDR capability, and SIM is security information event management, and when we talk about EDR as endpoint detection and response. So it's really the move from what we were talking about before, which was an antivirus. Originally, an antivirus was signature based, and all these other technologies that I talked about are more behavior based. So downloading the I love you.vbs file back in the day was detectable, right, by the antivirus. But now running a PowerShell script is something that you actually may have to do for your job, and there's no signature for that, but it's behavior, right? If if Ben's the kind of person that never runs a PowerShell script, and all of a sudden he does, things get detected through that. So a lot of organizations are now moving to those players, that do endpoint detection, and we're seeing an improvement, which is an improvement over the years, and which is really that's a really exciting and a positive finding out of the study, which is we're seeing detection time, response time, and recovery time getting better. For Canadian organizations, those who move into those spaces. And then the MDR finding is really around organizations, rather than spending time trying to understand the ins and outs and how to investigate these things and how to do their own threat hunting, using a third-party partner to do so. And we're seeing commoditization in that space, which I'm hopeful that commoditization in the managed detection and response MDR space will actually lead to cutting that have and have not gap that I talked about earlier. I'm hoping that that'll bring that to fruition for Canadian organizations, medium and small.
Yeah.
I just want to say very quickly, Evil, you touched the nerve. I was guilty of almost losing my MP3 collection when the I Love You virus came out.
Yeah.
I had to explain to my
signatures weren't recognized when I clicked I love you.
I had to explain to my 14-year-old what an MP3 was, MP3 file was. So that was a moment, a short moment in our lives where we had to deal with that. Another thing that I think it's really interesting too, KJ, when we talk about the improvements that we're seeing in terms of response time, recovery time, and detection time, is that we're seeing that there is a little bit of a shift away from the SIM. The SIM was like the most important, expensive part of the business. People aren't giving up the SIM. They're not moving away from it. The compliance requirements are still there, but we're seeing people get a lot more value when it comes to detection from the endpoint. But this could be a pendulum swing, right? Like we talked about, cloud is being the biggest, where attackers are focusing on the most, and this is why, Ben and I just got back from RSA. Everything was CNAPP. Everything was cloud security, right?
If not, it was AI. It was AI security.
It was AI security, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And saying that, because we did talk about AI a little bit before, and I wanted to just say that there's a lot of good information in protecting AI, though the tools may not be at the forefront yet. So in the industry, a lot of us know of OWASP, so the Open Worldwide Application Security Project. They really give guidance around protecting your web applications, etc. They've released a version for Gen AI. So it highlights the top 10 Gen AI risks. I would say if you're thinking of implementing an LLM or Gen AI, understand what the risks are.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting. I kind of go back to what Evo was talking about, role-based access control for AI, access to data cleanliness. And one of the things I really talk about with organizations is, you have to invest in your data to make it safe. But once you do that, all of a sudden, zero trust, as a methodology becomes easier to create policies around. DLP becomes a possibility. You're safeguarding your data for AI. There's a whole bunch of things that I think are really limited because we don't know our data very well. We don't know where it's at. What is the totality of the data? So all of that is absolutely critical. And I think it unlocks a lot of things. Once we do that, it really does. The other thing that's interesting, just from you talk about the endpoint, more and more we're having conversations in the OT space and where we can't put agents on things. And so all of a sudden, coming back to some of those frameworks and those best practices when it comes to securing, it changes the paradigm a little bit too. And so one of the things I'm noticing is a lot of focus on observability. and how do we in real time know what's on our network, what is it doing, as you point out, the use profiles, is there anomalies that we can detect, and I'm really also seeing sort of a blending of networking and security, both from a role within our customers' organizations. There's a lot more, working together, but also even from a tooling perspective, we're seeing traditional, more networked side focus more on security. We're seeing security products really focus more on the networking side of things, and so. When you look at some of the other trends that are maybe shifting from previous years into 2025, are there other technology and innovation trends that are emerging or that you think might be important as we move further into 2025, Evo?
I'll jump in real quick
Yes.
because I
Yeah,
have one at the top of my mind and I
sure.
don't want to forget it without naming any particular vendor per se. I've seen even in the data protection and backup space that they have cybersecurity tools and elements to their
Hmm.
actual tool set as well, where you can do threat hunting, etc., on that data. So that really helps with cyber recovery overall. But I've seen so many convergences in the past as well, but they're coming back again.
Yeah, visibility has always been one of those words that you see us talk about a lot in cybersecurity, and and this is why we went down the road of collecting every log from every device into a box and try to get visibility, and observability ties in really well with that. KJ, I love the idea of bringing visibility and observability together. And I think that there's real positive things that are happening with AI, and the use of large language models to really understand how what's happening, what's actually happening, and do I need to act on it, be it from the observability side or be it from the security side, as they start to tie in together. Seeing trends around OT, right? OT used to be such a real, like, as the Purdue model dictates, it really needs to be separate. But we're seeing lots of folks start to say, hey, you know what? That was a really hard thing to maintain. It was a hard thing to maintain. Now it's almost an impossible thing to maintain, the separation between OT and IT. And organizations are coming to us and asking how to do that, right? I think one of the things that I really hope for is that we can diminish technical debt by using AI, and using
Yeah.
technology to really have better integration with legacy systems, be it hybrid IT or cloud, wherever it is. And it's and organizations, when we ask Canadian organizations what were the challenges with getting zero trust going, identity and access management, yes. Scalability issues, absolutely. But there was 49% of organizations did talk about integration with legacy systems, right? There are things there that aren't ready to move that way. So technology wise, I think that there's a little taste of AI in everything. I think firewall rule management it should be an easy area for us to get better with AI. Start bringing context, not just looking for the any allows, but
Yeah.
how old is this rule? How long has it been there? What is it doing in my organization? That's another area. I think that's an easy win. And we're
When was
also
the last
seeing
time it was
secure
triggered?
aspects. You go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was
Sorry.
just saying, when was the last time was that rule triggered?
Yeah. Yeah, when was it triggered? What was it used
Yeah.
for? And then not, that's just the data behind it, but I'd love to hear the business context behind it, right? And us being able to say, you know what, this is for an application that's been deprecated months ago, and this application is on the way. Like, I know because there's a project to remove this application from the business, right? Like, those kind of things could be really interesting from that context there, that perspective.
So, so we kind of focused in on a couple of challenges there. You talked about the addition of additional attacks to the cloud. We talked a lot about really data classification and better understanding what you have out there. We talked about the shifting and maybe the combining of certain technologies or technologies playing in different places. We've talked about process maturity challenges that organizations are having. What are some of the top things, Ben, that you're seeing organizations invest in? Is it process changes? Is it tabletop exercises? Is it technical understanding? Like, what are organizations doing to try to tackle some of these challenges?
It really depends on their maturity and where they're at in their security life cycle, and I like the word cycle as part of that. So tabletops, a lot of organizations, they're doing it. If you think back, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was maybe the first, if not second year, the cybersecurity study came out. I was co-presenting with an individual, and he brought up the history of like fires, and I forget what city it was, but brought up the history about fires in a certain city and how each year they got better and better because they were testing for or practicing if there's going to be a fire, how do we respond, and gaining that kind of muscle and rigor. So the give us a second. The tabletops really assist with that because it's building that muscle. We're gonna get breached. How do we respond? How do we recover? How do we get back to business? How do we minimize the actual negative outcome of this breach?
And maybe it's an important thing just to mention with the tabletops, because I sat in on one last year where it was the city of Toronto, and the city of Toronto was looking at emergency services and what happens in the event of a large, say, power outage that takes down a lot of the city. Maybe can you give an idea of what a tabletop is for maybe listeners that haven't been part of that?
Absolutely, and there's many flavors to it. There's like the management stream where you want to make sure that people are following the incident response plan that these organizations have. And I always say, if you don't have an incident response plan at minimum, don't jump into a tabletop. You want to ensure that you have a documented process to follow, or the outcome of your tabletop, whether you did great or not, will be define and document your incident response plan. That doesn't necessarily help. Have your game plan in place, and let's test and make sure that the individuals that are supposed to be following it are following it. Or if they have to make changes, we could document these changes to your plan, because in real life your plan didn't necessarily follow what would happen in a real scenario. So that's one flavor. Another flavor is a little bit more technical. So we would simulate a breach. We'd bring individuals who can actually breach your environment from a technology standpoint. We would simulate a breach. What would you do then? What are the technical things you would do to recover, eradicate, etc., as part of that simulation? And then there's other flavors as well where we've leveraged a third party, but it's almost like a board game. So it's a pure simulation of this happens. Now, what are your options? So if that's more of a Dungeons and Dragons feel, but it depends on the maturity of the organization and what feel you want to take.
Yeah, I've had. So I think KJ, the when we have the first conversation with clients about tabletops, we actually ask them, like everything else, what's the outcome that you see out of here, right? And what you want to get out of it. I've had friends who have been in finance for years and came out to me, Ivo, actually, I know what you do now, because we went through a cybersecurity tabletop exercise, and we know what we need to do. And I asked them, like, okay, so what was the real value out of this? And the real value, it was just education for everybody at the table, right? To say, when this happens, I know that my job is to communicate to the press. Now, not only do I know that my job is to communicate to the press, but I know exactly what that email template's going to look like, and what are the pieces that I need to talk about or not talk about. What are the things that are sensitive that I shouldn't be talking about when I make that communication? Which you wouldn't send that communication until it was ready, but now you've had the opportunity to think about it, right? And it's in the back of your mind, and now the plan comes to life, right? The plan comes to life in the room, and you say, "Hey, oh, that's something we need to think about," I thought we backed that up, right? I thought we always backed up that instance. Oh, we don't back that instance up in the same way that we thought we did. Like, so there's a lot of interesting things that can come from it, the range of people who can participate in it could be, network technical folks, or the people in charge of the data, the people in charge of the business need to hear these stories too, because it starts to resonate across the whole organization. Tabletops are definitely hot. From a lot of organizations are asking to do them. We do a lot of them, and I think it's a huge value to any size of organization if you think about it.
And I would say a lot of them, even if they don't necessarily make that call to their PR agency or marketing, but involving them as well, because if a breach is going to occur, you're involving a lot more departments than just your technical team.
Yeah,
and it goes back to, really, at the end of the day, you're testing to see where there's gaps in your process, but you're really preparing.
Yeah.
And you know what they say about preparing.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting too about the tabletops, and I love to hear you guys mention that as a tactic that organizations can, because when we talked earlier, we were talking about, maybe the processes aren't up to speed, and maybe we need to improve upon like what we're doing. And so the thing I like about tabletops is it doesn't require that we buy technology. It doesn't require that we do an implementation project. It doesn't require that we have a huge budget for it. It really is our time. And I think what I really like is it dispels assumptions. Well, I assumed that backup was done this way. I assumed that we had this process. I assumed that we had MFA on this portal that our customers or our suppliers can log into. And I find that really powerful. So anyway,
it also gives you a little "I told you so" moment, KJ, where you can say, "Hey, remember when you didn't approve MFA for this application last year? This is why," right? So it gives you an opportunity to have those tough conversations.
Yeah, I think the most interesting moment I had in a tabletop exercise was during a disaster recovery tabletop exercise, and the question was, okay, who calls the disaster? Who initiates us implementing all of this work? And nobody said anything. And so we realized at that point that the person who needs to call the disaster was not in the room. And so so I think it just challenges assumptions. So then Ivo, kind of move on from that. Again, what are some of the other things that organizations, what are some of the other tactics that organizations should be looking at today that maybe they're not thinking about to try to mitigate some of these other challenges they're having?
Yeah, I mean, we in the study we have the final recommendations that we typically talk to, or and there's a whole section there, cdw.ca /cybersecurity trends, if you want to go download the report. We have recommendations on how much organizations are actually accelerating AI, and what are the things that they're doing. Turning that zero trust conversation into action is another area that we cover. So there's a whole bunch of different areas, and talking about how mature organizations even how they accelerate AI in their organization, and we touched on the value of penetration testing, and continuous penetration testing is an area that's been growing quite a bit. And obviously, if we're seeing so much value from testing, then maybe it's time now to start moving forward into continuous testing. It's an area we've moved into with our organizations that we support. So continuous testing, it's the evolution of vulnerability testing, and really looking at response and detection. So there's multiple areas, there's multiple pieces. I think that the conversations we've been having with clients have been evolving over the years, and that's really encouraging when we talk to Canadian clients. I think that defining a security roadmap, no matter how small you are, no matter whether you have a large security team or if you're doing security off the side of your desk, having areas where from a business risk perspective will make a difference for your organization, and then explaining those to the people who you're reporting to can be really valuable. And saying, hey, here's where we're going, and getting your buy-in or getting their not buy-in for to make sure that you're at least you're trying to do the right security things as you move forward. So I don't know if that answers your question, KJ, but there's a lot there. There's a lot of areas where I think organizations can find value, but it needs to be tailor made to what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's the other thing that's really interesting about the security study is that you're hitting such a wide swath of different organizations in Canada, but you do have some sort of vertical specific information in there. You can help organizations sort of understand what their peers are doing. And you're right. I think cybersecurity, like so much of what we do, it's not one size fits all. It needs to be sort of tailored. And I know that's like Ben was talking about earlier, the way that we approach security with prepare, defend, respond. It's kind of a NIST associated approach to security, but it isn't just a framework that's been adopted as is. It's been really sort of made into your own processes, your own approach, and organizations need to do that. They need to know that these frameworks, even something like zero trust as a methodology, is not something you just do as is. You have to sort of adapt it for your use case and your needs, which is I think really powerful. But I think the value in the security study of putting that information out there, allowing people to understand what their peers are doing, I think is really, really powerful.
And just to touch on the NIST versus what we talk about from prepare, defend, respond, the magic piece that's missing, that is recover, right? And that's an area that we want to make sure we talk to clients a lot about as well, right? This is where my world and your world really comes together, KJ, is when we start talking about resilience, right? And it used to be the conversation used to be resilience, and there's the IDC survey report that talks about cyber recovery and cyber resilience, like they're together there. Cyber recovery and resilience are playing a lot together because of ransomware attacks, because of what we see from a data perspective, right? So I think that we should definitely not ignore the recover piece of the business, right? We have disaster recovery as a service capabilities. We've had them for years, and now they're part of this cyber security conversation, which continues, like you said, to broaden and broaden even more as it matures, right? Cybersecurity is, I've been in it for 20 years, and it still continues to mature. I think it's still, I don't think it's hit puberty yet from a practice perspective. Yeah.
As you said, Evo, earlier on, and I tend to say it as well, it really is an arms race. I say that around AI and security and the modern threat, but overall, it's continuously just been an arms race. Every time as quote unquote defenders, we think we get better, the offensive side gets better as well.
For sure.
Yeah, so I think that's good, and I do think everything's evolving, everything's changing, and I've said for years I don't think I could keep up with the pace of change that we've seen with cybersecurity, and now AI has been foisted on me, so now I'm dealing with the challenges a little bit. So to kind of pivot to sort of a future lens,
Sure.
And I know we talked a lot about, maybe technology is not necessarily the focus, but I want to ask a pure sort of a technology question. Are you seeing investments in any specific types of technology? I know you mentioned, EDR, XDR, MDR, but are there, going from the historical data, all 10 years of the cybersecurity study, is there anything in 2025 that jumped out at you where there's a technology that people are really focusing in on?
I'm going to jump first. I know Evil's ready to go, but I'm going to jump first. And it's a broad answer, but really specifically around the security of AI and LLMs. So
Okay.
whether they're your own in-house LLMs or models or your own Gen AI or chatbots, etc., that you're running, or external, that I believe that's going to be a very hot industry. I've seen a couple of tools. I've seen tools that look at it more from a offensive security standpoint, so a testing standpoint or a red team standpoint, and I've seen tools that look at defense, how to start blocking malicious activities, whether going into your models or coming out of your models, etc. And I've seen a few, closer to a couple, but a few, and I expect to see a lot more.
Yeah, that's I'll double down on that. I think um, one of the advantages of we've seen an immense number of, like, the report had an immense number of proof of concepts that were done by organizations, 17 on average for Canadian
Wow.
organizations. If you think about it, there's 704 organizations we queried, and the average was 17 POCs for AI. So people are getting out there and trying it. So that protecting that and making sure that that's secure. You think of the future where we're going, but I think in terms of the difference between this and the previous hype waves we've been in, I think that there's a real excuse for security when it comes to OpenAI. Like, there's a good excuse to say, you know what, we're gonna have to figure out AI to AI traffic encryption. We're going to have to figure out, the identity of the AI. We're going to have to figure out what kind of data these models are built on. We're going to have to figure out what open source libraries we're using, which SDKs we're using to build things. Like, there's a lot of good excuses for us to take care of this security technical debt that was there before, and we were behind on, that now we can bring to the organization and make it, and solve that problem. And we didn't even, in another area, talking about, technical things, we didn't talk about post-quantum cryptography at all in this podcast, right?
That's
And
for the next episode.
and that's an area where, we had CISOs in the room at our summit last year, and that was a big area for them in terms of focus and understanding. And I think understanding these things I think conceptually they're starting to understand what the post-quantum world will look like,
Yeah.
but we haven't really talked about how it's going to affect their business on day one, right? I think we need to talk about what are the practical ways in which this will affect or not affect them. The large organizations think about it, but mid-market hasn't even started thinking about it yet.
Yeah. Q Day is not something I even want to think about at this moment. Like, that's a tomorrow me problem. But you're right; it is coming faster than we are thinking about it. And what's
This isn't
interesting
an
about
eight-hour podcast, KJ, where we can break it down.
Yeah, I think we should get Kristen involved and break it down.
For sure.
But yeah, I think that would be a good topic. And then on the AI side, what's interesting there too is that's evolving too. I mean, we just had the issue. I'm going to date the recording of this podcast as May 2nd, and so hopefully it'll come out soon. But yeah, we just had the event with ChatGPT where it was very sycophantic with its responses, and it was encouraging you pretty much based on whatever you were telling it. And so when you have a reliance on these third party sources, and you're using those in internal functions, and all of a sudden they aren't functioning the way you expect them to be functioning, you better have controls in place to identify that, mitigate for that. And then, I worry about the challenge where your internal AI chatbot that knows all of your service desk policies and procedures just becomes an informant for a bad actor that happens to have access to it. I just look at that as, just think about, footprinting and how much easier the process of footprinting as a bad actor or red team analyst is if you've got a helpful assistant that answers all of your questions about everything to do with the AI department or the IT department. So absolutely.
But the silver lining there, KJ, is that the attackers and the red teamers, not just the attackers, but also the red teamers are thinking that way too. Like, we've seen some recent demos on some prompt injection and some prompt based attacks that were like, it's all the creativity that we've seen cybersecurity pen testers use, now augmented by AI as well, right? So there is a people thinking about the defense, and there's people building some really cool things, and we're seeing the big companies do acquisitions. The big cybersecurity companies are doing big acquisitions in that space because they're seeing this as the next thing to protect in organizations. So it's definitely an exciting future when it comes to this stuff.
Okay, so this is where I want you to jump scare everybody. Like, okay, so when you think about cybersecurity, I mean, again, I think the risks of not mitigating cybersecurity challenges probably keep a lot of executives up at night. I mean, just talk about Q day and quantum and what that means to encryption and all of that. Looking into the future, maybe what is one cybersecurity risk that you don't think is getting the level of attention? I find it interesting. There's so much investment in AI security. It feels like people have at least identified that and they're moving forward with that. But if you had one thing that you could, get customers, organizations, IT leaders to think about Evo, maybe what's that one thing that's not getting the airtime that you think it deserves?
I touched on it a little bit already, but I'll give it I'll double down on it, which is the small and medium business in Canada has no direct resource to rise out of the ashes after they've been compromised. I think. I think there's sort of a breach fatigue, especially in the market and on announcements, and you hear large companies all over the world get compromised, and next day their stock bounces back up, and they are still household brands, right? But the medium and small companies in Canada, it's like a virtual meteor has hit their building. They can't do payroll. Right? They use these SaaS applications or whatever applications they now no longer have access to, or they need to make sure everybody gets paid on Friday. They can't log into their systems. If you're an architecture company, or even if you're a plumbing company, these problems can affect you, right? You're an engineering company, everything's digital, and now you have access to nothing. You're sending people home, and you're not going to bounce back like the other brands have, right? These large brands kind of, and the media and everybody seems to think, oh, hackers are a problem, but everybody bounces back, right? Like these large organizations now, we're back to shopping at the same stores we were that got compromised last year, and have been really no impact. But there is impact, right? And I think it's highly misunderstood that the small medium companies can bounce back, and it's super cheap for organizations to do so. There isn't a lot of money, there isn't a lot of margin to go and spend in cybersecurity recovery, especially after the fact, after it's happened. So I think we have to be careful not to talk about cybersecurity attacks as these really sophisticated things, when they are really, they are at the end of the day, it's a B&E against medium and small business in Canada, right? Sorry,
Okay,
that's my
Ben,
scary story. What's your scary story?
It's like a campfire story for
we need
right?
flashlights.
I'll go back to the cloud misconfigurations. Not to get into too much detail, but a personal friend of mine had a startup, and it was a promising startup, and they were built on cloud. I didn't know that they were starting the company, to be fair, but I was trying to assist them with their cybersecurity posture. And while we were just building up the policies, etc., they were going for cyber insurance. They were breached, and it was pretty bad. And it was simply a misconfiguration in the cloud. I would say that needs a lot more attention.
Yeah, it's a good point. I went to a collision conference a couple years ago, 2 years ago, and I just asked people, like, what are you doing about protecting your data? And everybody had a cloud platform. They had a development team, third-party development team that was building their application. And I must have talked to 200 customers over the week that I was there, and nobody had a data protection strategy. So I fully agree with you there. Like basics of configuration, doing the right things, absolutely.
I almost want to walk away from the word protection because it's so broad, right? Like we're gonna, data protection can break up into so many things. When we there's people who say that DLP is data protection, right? Well, you're protecting your data. Well, you're data loss prevention, right? Or data leak prevention, however you want to call it. I think that there's we're doing a disservice by using the word protection too much when we need to be very specific.
Yeah.
And then we go back to the tabletop conversation too. Like it's about finding out how the business can handle not
Yeah.
having
Yeah. And
not having access to this data.
yeah, and I've got an interesting graphic. I don't know. Like, I feel like I should be challenging the editor to say, yeah, put this here, put this here. I was hoping we could put up a link in the podcast and a link on the display that talks, shows how to people to helps people get the cybersecurity study and that. But yeah, I agree with you. We sort of break it into backup resiliency, disaster resiliency, and cyber resiliency, and they're not exactly the same thing, but they have facets that are related to each other. Okay, so let's go out on a high note, though.
Okay.
Ben, I'll ask the question to you first. What's a positive? Like going into 2025, 2026, what's something we can be really excited about? For me, I'm going to go ahead and claim the idea that people have identified AI as a risk. They're already moving on their plans there. But what's something positive that IT people, CIOs can take out of the cybersecurity that they can sort of latch onto and move forward in a positive way in the future?
I'll give three answers that are interrelated.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, AI. We talk about AI risk, AI risk, AI risk, but AI is also making things a lot more efficient. And going back to Eva was saying, it's leveling the playing field. I may not need X amount of people in a security operations center when I can leverage AI to do a lot of the tasks and have one or two people verify the information that's coming out or verify the actions. So I'll say that's one. That's really helped the industry out a lot. Next up, I would say, and I'm losing my train of thought, I would say security testing. Security testing, again, doubling down. The organizations that were doing more security testing were getting better security outcomes. And that reminds me of what I was really going to say, and it was really leveraging AI for security testing. So again, make sure you do your manual testing, very important, but you could get closer to continuous testing and real great continuous testing, leveraging services or systems that use AI for their continuous testing. That's another big one. And then the last one, I believe, which was combined with the other thought, the more testing you do, the more favorable your outcomes are. I would say those were the positive highlights and actions we can take.
I love those, and I would say I agree with them 100%. And I think the other interesting piece of this is that I'm hoping that when we talk about that gap, that small business gap, is that a lot of what's happening here will make those top security controls or capabilities accessible to people, to organizations that can, that can afford to use it and implement it, right? Making those things really having all this knowledge and all this capability. One of the great things about AI is that it's able to interpret and communicate really complex things in a simpler manner for folks. And cybersecurity is, historically, as you said, one of those things that constantly keeps changing. Historically bad at being able to communicate itself to the business folks, right? To the people who own the business and run the business. So I think that's I think it could be a really exciting time for us to really bring the capabilities forward. And
yeah. And I think it's also an area of continued investment. I think it's got attention. A lot of this has budget, which is obviously positives. So just so everybody has another chance, and there's another opportunity for maybe our editors to put up a link. Where can we go to find the cybersecurity study, Evo?
cdw.ca/cybersecurity trends.
Perfect. Oh, that's awesome. So thanks. Like I said at the beginning, you two are two of my favorite people at CDW. It's awesome to bring you onto the podcast. I appreciate, your insights. I know that other people appreciate it too. I get a ton of feedback. People love that you're bringing ideas, and we're trying to help people sort of find their way through this technology rat race that we're all in. So thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it.
I love it. It was like sitting down for a beer. It was fantastic.
Yeah, without the beer,
In
unfortunately.
person.
So, So I'm your host, KJ Burke. Thanks both for joining me on the podcast today. Thanks for our listeners on the CDW Canada Tech Talks podcast. Thanks for tuning in. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider subscribing, leave us a rating, give us some feedback on topics you'd like us to cover. And then episodes will drop the first Tuesday of every month. Until then, keep learning, exploring, growing, and innovating. And thanks again. Have a good one.